Hello and welcome to one and all. In today's class, we'll check out the what is the share of public and private sector in the GDP of the country. In the previous class, we discussed about the sectoral contribution to national income. That is, what is the share of primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors, isn't it? So, apart from primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors, we should also know about the what is the contribution made by the public sector and private sector in the GDP of the country. Okay. So first, what is the meaning of public sector and private sector? So any undertaking which are owned, established, and controlled by the government of India. So they come like, for example, uh, central government undertakings like railways, departmental undertakings like ONGC, NTPC, PFCL, Power Finance Corporation Limited, Reserve Bank of India, etc. So they all come under the public sector. And private sector, the undertakings which are owned, established, and controlled by the private individuals or group of private individuals. So they come under the private sector. For example, we have the Reliance, Tata's, etc. Okay. So before independence, that is during the British rule, only the private sector was dominating in the country. The public sector, they had a very limited role. So during the British rule, the role of public sector was confined only to certain areas like uh, power, irrigation, railways, etc. So only very limited power, irrigation, etc. So that means during the British rule, only the private sector was having a major role in the country. But after independence, the government passed two industrial resolutions. One is that is industrial policy resolution, IPR, in 1948. So basically, the industrial policy resolution is it provides the framework for the pattern of industrialization that has to be adopted in the country. Okay. So meaning basically it is like what are all the industries should be under the public sector, what are all the industries under the private sector, or whether it is going to be both private and public sector, or only under the public or only under the private. So okay, things like that. So the first, because as soon as we attained the independence, when the country wanted to develop the industrialization in our country, the government wanted to fix what pattern of industrialization we are going to adopt in the country. So in order to have that uh, detailed information regarding the pattern of industrialization in the country, the government announced the first industrial policy resolution in 1948. So in this 1948 industrial policy resolution, the government announced the mixed economic system in our country. So mixed economic system, you know that there are three types of economic systems: capitalism, everything is owned and controlled by the private sector, or it can be socialism, mostly everything will be under the government control like Russia. And India wanted to have a middle path. So from that time on, so it was decided that in 1948 itself, the government is going to allow both the public sector, coexistence of both public sector and private sector. That is what is known as the mixed economic system. So from 1948 onwards, that is as soon as India attained independence itself, we have decided, the government has decided that India is going to have both public and private sector in the establishment of industries and other activities in the country. Okay, so this was the in 1948. And so basically, as I mentioned, industrial policy resolution is pattern of industrialization. That means we have adopted the mixed economic system, and also in that policy first detailedly mentioned what are all the industries to be under the public sector and what are all the industries that are going to be under the uh, control of the private sector. Okay, so that was in 1948. Then second, the government announced the second industrial policy resolution in 1956. So industrial policy resolution in 1956, IPR 1956. So according to the situation in the country, the government keeps on periodically announcing the industrial policy resolution. So this second industrial policy resolution in 1956, it was coinciding with the commencement of second 5-year plan. So the first 5-year plan was between 1951-52 to 1955-56. So from 1955-56, the second 5-year plan in the country started. And in this plan, the government wanted to give more importance on the development of industries, because the first plan was an agricultural plan. So the second plan, the government concentrated on the development of industries. So and simultaneously, the government passed the industrial resolution 1956. So through this policy, the government gave a dominant role to the public sector. So in accordance with the plan objectives, the plan objective is development of heavy industries in the country. So development of heavy industries, and as per the public industrial policy resolution of 1956, development of heavy industries under the public sector. So what happened? Meaning, at the time of till independence, the contribution, the share of private sector to the GDP was more, and the public sector contribution was very less. And starting after 1956, and the industrial policy resolution, the role of public sector started increasing, and the share of public sector in the GDP started increasing in the country. Simultaneously, the share of private sector started decreasing. Okay, and by towards the late 1970s or early 1980s, it was found out that the public sector was incurring severe losses. Okay, they were not able to manage the heavy industrialization in the country. Not only industries, so many other major activities are undertaken only by the public sector. Only the very minor uh, unstrategic areas were given to the private sector. So by the time we reached the late 1970s or 1980s, it was found out that the public sector was incurring heavy losses. Okay, they were not able to cope up with the demands of industrialization and the other activities in the country. So in 1991, the government announced the new economic reforms. So new economic reforms is giving this the LPG model of growth, that is liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Slowly, the public, so one by one, the public sector is handing over to the private sector through the process of disinvestment. Or in other words, the private sector was given more importance, slowly gaining importance in the developmental or the development of industries and other activities in the country. So after 1991, again, the share of public sector decreased and the share of private sector kept on increasing. So this is how the share of public and private sector changed over a period of time in the country. I repeat again, before independence, at the time of British rule, only the private sector was the dominant force in the country. The role of public sector was limited, confined only to the areas of power, irrigation, very minor fields. Okay, I mean the field as it is a major, but then the number of fields were restricted to the very limited to the public sector. So after independence, the government announced the two industrial policy resolutions, one in 1948, which is industrial policy resolution. It's announcing it is a blueprint of industrialization in the country. What pattern of industrialization we are going to follow in our country. So through the IPR 1948, the government announced the mixed economic system, and from that time onwards, we are following the mixed economic system of economic development. That is coexistence of both public sector and private sector. And again, in 1956, the government announced the second industrial policy resolution, coinciding with the commencement of second five-year plan, which gave importance to the development of heavy industries. And through the policy of IPR 1956, the government wanted to establish all the heavy industries under the public sector. Okay, so from that time onwards, the share of public sector in the GDP started increasing. But towards the end of 1970s and early 1980s, we have found out, it was found out that the public sector was incurring severe losses. Okay, they were no longer able to cope up with the demands of industrialization in the country. So the government changed the pattern, like in other words, 1991, announced the new economic reforms, the LPG model of growth, in other words, giving more importance to the private sector in the country. So after 1991, again, the share of private sector started increasing and the share of public sector started decreasing. So this is how the share of public and private sector in the country kept on changing. So now let us hope the concept is clear. Now let us check with the data. Okay. Share of public sector and private sector in percentages. So let us break into 5 periods. Year, percentage share of public sector, percentage share of private sector. First, 1950-51. So 1950-51, the percentage share of public sector was only 8%. So alternatively, the private sector share was to the GDP. Okay, this is to the GDP. So 92% was contributed by the private sector to the GDP, and only 8% was contributed by the public sector. Because during the British rule, private sector was given more importance. Then moving on to 1990-91. So the share of public sector increased to 23.6%. As I mentioned, from the second five-year plan, the government started giving more importance to the public sector. Alternatively, the share of private sector decreased to 76.4%. And when you take 2000, 2001, 23.2, 76.8. So you can see that slowly the share of public sector is decreasing, and slowly because 1991 the liberalization, privatization process was initiated in the country. You can see that slowly the share of private sector started increasing. And 2005, 2006, it's further reduced to 21.7%, and private sector share increased to 78.3%. And finally, in 2009-10, 21.2%. This one is 78.8. So you can see that how the share of public sector, it increased and then again it started decreasing. Alternatively, the share of private sector decreased and again it started increasing. And here, up to here, this is based on at 1999 2000 prices, constant prices, and This is based on at 2004 2005 prices. So we have seen that the Central Statistical Organization recently changed the base year prices to 2004 2005. Anyway, this is only to understand the concept. Either we are calculating at the 1999 2000 prices or at 2004 2005 prices, the concept means is the same. The share of public sector is decreasing and the share of private sector is increasing. Okay, so this is how the contribution changed between the public and private sector to the GDP. So if you're representing in the form of a diagram is just optional. This is the presentation will be good. Okay. So let me extend this further. So it was 1950, 51, 1990, 91, 2009, 10. Okay. So here we'll measure the percentages 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100. So in 1950-51, the share of public sector was only 8%, isn't it? So it's somewhere around here. So 1990, it was only public sector, it was only 8%. But whereas the share of private sector was almost 92%. So this is the share of so this is 92%. And then in 1991, the public sector share was 23.6%. So 23.6%. And this one, the share was around 76.4%. So and 2009, it's further decreased to, public sector decreased to 21.2%. Private sector slightly increased to 78.8%, almost 80%. So, okay. So public sector, this is private sector. So when you look at the diagram, you can see that how the share of private sector decreased from 92% and again it started increasing, and how this also it increased from 8% to 23% and then again started decreasing. Okay, so this is how the share of public and private sector changed in the country. Okay. So share of percentage share of public and private sectors in GDP. I hope the concept is clear to all of you. Okay. Now this is with the first part of the third unit, that connecting with the national income. So trends in the growth rates of national income. What is the share in the contribution, the sectoral contribution of the national income, and the third part to the percentage share of public and private sectors in the GDP. Okay. So the next part is dealing with the inequalities in the distribution of income and wealth. So it is not only the generation of national income, how the national income of the country is being distributed. So that also has to be checked. Okay. So moving on to the second part, inequalities in the distribution of national income. Distribution of income and wealth. Okay. So economic development is a, I repeat again, it is a normative statement, meaning how it should be developed, how the country should develop. So one of the important objectives of Indian 5-year plan is, apart from what should be the growth rate in the national income or per capita income, etc., it's control the inequalities in the income distribution. Okay. So that is also one of the major objectives of Indian 5-year plan. Okay. Now, only thing is, in India, there is no official agency that is entrusted with the responsibility of uh, evaluating or calculating or checking out the inequalities in the country. See, just like we have central statistical organization to measure the national income of the country, but like that, there is no separate agency entrusted with the responsibility of calculating the inequalities in the income distribution. So there are so many organizations, they make their own surveys, like, for example, NCA, National Council of Applied Economic Research, the Reserve Bank of India, the National Sample Survey Organization, etc. So these are all the independent agencies that are again appointed by the government or asked by the government to evaluate the income inequalities existing in the country from time to time. Okay. So these agencies, they calculate the income inequalities based on, so it can be either, income inequalities can be calculated based on either consumption or household expenditure. That is, calculate income inequalities based on either household expenditure or personal income. That means either expenditure method or the income method. Okay. So based on what is the percentage of expenditure incurred by the bottom 20%, poorest 20% of the population in the country compared to the top 20% of the population in the country, or what is the income earned by the top 10% or 20% of the country compared to the bottom 10% or 20% of the country. So either from the expenditure point of view or from the income point of view, the income inequalities are calculated. And also, apart from income and expenditure, it is also calculated based on asset or wealth distribution, like any property, land, etc. Okay. So these are all the various ways the income inequalities in the country is being evaluated. And there is also economists, from the economic point of view, the economists, they use something called as Gini coefficient to measure the income income inequalities in the country. So this Gini coefficient is to measure this is a mathematically established formula to Gini coefficient, which is used to measure the income inequalities. So this is what normally the economists use. So the value of Gini coefficient, it ranges between 0 to 1. So the value of Gini coefficient ranges between 0 to 1. Okay. Suppose if it is 0, then that indicates perfect equality. That means there is no the value is 0 means there is no inequality. That's why it is a perfect equality. Or if the value is 1, opposite, it is perfect inequality. So a country might be within this 0 to 1. So if it is closer to 0, then more or less the income distribution is, there is equal distribution of income and wealth. If it is closer to 1, then automatically it indicates that there is wide income inequalities in the country. Okay. So as per there is a survey conducted by, as far as India is concerned, as per the Indian Human Development Survey conducted on 2004-2005. For India, anyway, it's mentioned here. The Gini coefficient was, the value for India was based on Gini coefficient was, it was 0.54. So this is based on expenditure. Sorry, this is based on income, based on per capita income. And it was 0.35 based on per capita expenditure. Okay, so now you can see that the value is lesser when it is calculated on expenditure compared to the value on calculated based on income. So when you look at the 0.35, then it is less than half, isn't it? We will tend to say that there is not that much of income inequalities in the country. But when you look at the 0.54, it is more than half. We're closer to 1. So the income inequalities exist in the country. And see, for information, always when we are calculating on the expenditure method, the value will show it will show a lesser value. The reason is the reason is, see, even when we are not, the poorer households, even when they are not earning any income, they have to incur the consumption expenditure, isn't it? Nobody can, it cannot be totally zero. Income might not be that much, but still they have to incur the expenditure. Or in other words, they will also participate in their activity, expenditure activity is also shown in the expenditure. But then their income earning activity is not shown when we are calculating based on income, because they are not earning that income, or they are not earning that much amount of income. So always the value, when it is calculated based on expenditure, it will show a lesser one than compared to the value when it is calculated based on income. But see, there is a comment, report given by the World Bank. So the World Bank concludes or World Bank equates India to Brazil and South Africa. South Africa and Brazil are considered to be one of the worst, two of the countries, the worst countries, meaning having the high income inequalities in the world. Okay, those two countries are having the maximum possible income inequalities in the countries, and World Bank has equated India to Brazil and South Africa. That is, both countries are having high income inequalities. So we are also, as per the World Bank's report, we are also falling under that category. So they, as I mentioned before, World Bank periodically releases the World Development Report. So World Bank's World Development Report, which is based on household expenditure. So this is what they have found out. So they have mentioned that in India, the lowest 20% is the poorest, the bottom 20%. Their share in the total expenditure, their share of total expenditure is 21%. Okay, and the highest, that is the richest. So this is poor, lowest means poor, this is the rich. The highest 20%, their share of total expenditure is 30%. Okay, so even that means what they are having only a very, just like income, they are having a very lesser share in the total national income. The expenditure also they are having a very lesser, because they cannot afford to spend that much. So like that, different organizations, they have made the comparison, and they have concluded that there is a wide amount of income inequalities in the country. So there is, according to OECD, that is Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries. So in December, so they have found made a survey, and they have found out that in December 2011, so this is what they have to say: the top 10% of wage earners in India make 12 times, highlighted, more than the bottom 10%. So the richest, the wage owner, the high professionals, all those people, whatever the income which they are earning are 10 times or 12 times more than the bottom 10%. This is in 2011, compared to 6 years ago. Sorry, compared to only 6 times 20 years ago. That means what? 20 years ago, the top 10% wage earners, they were making only 6 times more than the bottom 10%. But now, in 2011, they are making 12 times more than the bottom 10%. That means what? The income inequalities in the country has doubled in the country. So it is also said that India's richest 100 persons had a combined net worth of as high as 17% of India's GDP. See, even our agriculture itself contributing 16%, but top 100% They are having a share of 17% of India's GDP. And this COVID pandemic still further accentuated the inequalities because the poorer section, they couldn't afford that much of health accessibility. So this further increased the income inequalities in the country. So the conclusion is there is a wide amount of income inequalities happening in India. Okay, so let me stop with this. In the next class, we will continue with the what are all the major causes of income inequalities in the country and what are all the remedial measures the government has taken. Okay, so these data is just proving that all these surveys made by all these agencies are just proving that there is a wide amount of income inequalities existing in the country. Okay, hope all of you are understood the concept. Okay, so if you find this video useful, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you have any doubts, please don't fail to mention in the comment box. Okay, so until my next class, next video, take care. Bye bye.